All right, hello debaters. Today we're going to talk about something that is very important in debate and a really useful skill to have just thinking in real life. It's called impact weighing. So what we're going to talk about in impact weighing today is what it is, how it relates to how you debate, and then how you can actually think about doing it and doing it well in debate. So the basic point is that impact weighing tells the judge why your argument is important. If you prove that everything you say is true and that the things you say are going to happen will happen, that still leaves the question of why the judge should care. Even if you say something is bad or something good will happen or something bad will be prevented, you still need to convince the judge that that thing really is good or bad, right? And you have to have some metric or some way of explaining that that makes sense to the judge. Because something you think is bad, the judge might not think is that bad. You think something you think is good, the judge might not think is that good, right? So you need to have some more objective, clear way of explaining to them what the bad thing is or what the good thing is. And we're going to talk about that in three different ways today. We're going to talk about time frame, probability, and magnitude. So we'll get into those later. Don't worry about those right now. So what's the basics of impact weighing? Why do we do it? What's it mean? So at the end of the debate, as we get towards the end, when you're talking less about the evidence itself and more about your story and more about trying to persuade the judge that what you want them to do is important and it has to be done, you need to explain why the judge should care, right? So just thinking rationally, thinking in general, how do we say something is important in real life? Usually we say, well, it's going to affect you very deeply, or it's going to be a thing that's going to harm you a lot, or it's going to help you like make your life a lot better. Like if you want a really good example of this, just watch TV or like watch any advertisement. Every advertisement at the bottom of it says either there's something bad in your life that this product will solve, or there's something good that you don't have that this product will give you. And every advertisement is basically making the argument to you that there's some impact you're missing out on. I'm not saying debate is like advertising necessarily, but certainly in both, we want to say that, the thing we're trying to have done is important and is worth people's time. So just as a quick thing to think about, when we think about, on one hand, stopping nuclear war, and on the other hand, helping someone who like fell down, and this clip art's so goofy, I love it, it's really silly. Those two things, we know that stopping a nuclear war is more important than helping someone who fell down. But why do we know that? How can we articulate that? If you're thinking to yourself like, oh, well, a nuclear war would harm so many other people, it would hurt the environment, maybe make our planet unlivable, et cetera, et cetera. Now you're thinking with impact weighing, because you're comparing two different things and you're saying this one is way more important than the other because of these reasons. And that's the point we're trying to get to with impact weighing. It's not just enough to say, oh, well, I think this thing is bad, so you should not let it happen because it's bad. You need to get to a deeper level where you say, it's bad because it would cause these things, or it would make the world worse in this way, or it affect people in this way. You have to have some sort of explanation that is actually persuasive to a judge, to another person. So the three ways we're going to talk about that today are time frame, probability, and magnitude. We're going to talk about magnitude first because it's the most easy and obvious of all the impact weighing forms. So magnitude is just how strong the impact itself is. You can think of it as how many people it affects or to what degree. So maybe it affects a lot of people, but it only affects them like a little bit. Like if the government were to pass a law that's like, we want to tax everyone 1 cent, 1 penny. It's like, okay, yeah, that affects everyone in the United States, but it doesn't really affect everyone that much, right? Whereas if you were to say, the government should pass a law taxing billionaires 99% of their wealth, well, there's really not that many billionaires, right? So it doesn't really affect that many people. But the ones it affects them quite a lot. It changes their lives very dramatically, for better or worse, however you want to think about it. So the magnitude is how strong an impact is. And the best way to think about that is how many people it affects and to what degree. So obviously you should think right away, not all impacts are made the same. Some of them affect more people, some affect less. At the end of your story, you're going to want to say that doing the thing you want the judge to do, whether that's passing the plan or not passing the plan, is going to affect a lot of people, and it's going to affect them very deeply because you want to have a really big impact to what you're saying, right? So for example, I want you to just think about these as we go through them. I'm going to give you a second to pause and think about these after we talk about them. I want you to think about these on a scale of 0 to 10. 0 being, this basically doesn't rate at all, doesn't matter at all in the grand scheme of things. And then 10 being, this is the worst possible thing that could happen. So this first one is you stub your toe on a corner. You walk around the house, the table got moved a couple inches, you didn't notice, you slam your foot into it, stub your toe, ouch, hurts, it's annoying, right? In the grand scheme of things, how does that rate versus everything that's ever happened in history, everything that's going on in the world right now? Is it a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10? Where does it rate? How about this one? Nuclear war happens. Say, U.S. launches a few nukes. China says, "Whoa, we don't like that. We're going to launch ours too. We're scared. We don't want to get hit and then not hit back, right?" And we have a nuclear war. Lots of people die. Maybe the planet's no longer inhabitable. Same thing with like climate change, right? What if climate change really goes out of control and we can't stop it anymore and we turn into Mars? How does that compared to what's going on in the world right now and the history of human society? How does that compare? Is that like a 0, like whatever, we can just shrug it off, it's not a big deal? Or is it a 10? Is it like the worst thing that could possibly happen, and why? And not all impacts need to be negative, right? Impacts magnitude can also be positive. It can be a good thing that happens. So let's say a cure for cancer is found. Where does that rate? Between 0, minor inconvenience, and 10, best thing that could possibly happen. That's maybe a little more difficult one, right? Because we have to think about, well, how many people have cancer? How much does it affect them? How many people will have cancer? How much would it affect them? And then how does it affect the other people in their lives, right? Because even if, someone gets cancer, it's not like it only affects them. It affects their community, their family, everyone who knows them, everyone who's been in their life, who's around them. So it's worth thinking about how these impacts radiate out and ripple out to other people. And cure for cancer is good, obviously, so it'd bring a lot of happiness to a lot of people. And then this last one is the power supply of a country shuts down for 2 hours. What impact would that have? How would that affect people? What would be the worst case scenario that would happen because of that? And then what are some of the things that we think are pretty probable to happen because of that? So take some time to think that through. I think if you're watching this as a class together, you should probably stop here and just talk about it together, see where people's ratings are, and then ask why people rated things differently and how they ended up where they are. Because that will tell you on a scale of 0 to 10 what the magnitude of these impacts is. And so pause if you haven't yet. The point of this is that the more serious a problem is, more serious an impact is, the more important it is to solve, right? Because you stubbing your toe on the corner, like, I get that. That's an inconvenience for you. That sucks for 30 seconds, a minute, whatever. But it's really not anything compared to nuclear war, right? So if we have the option to solve one or solve the other, obviously we want to stop nuclear war rather than stop you from stubbing your toe on a corner. And this is an important way to think in debate because both teams are going to have impacts that they want to say are important. So if you want the judge to be persuaded by your action, by your argument, you want to be able to say that the magnitude of your impact is greater than the opponent's because yours is going to affect more people more deeply, and therefore the judge should deal with that problem before they deal with the other problems. Okay, second one is probability. Probability is really straightforward. It's a straightforward concept, but sort of hard to figure out. And I think in debate, this is where people's brains go right away, because sometimes we have these somewhat long, complex chains that start at one thing and then lead to another thing, and it seems a little bit improbable. And then sometimes we have some things that are like 100% probability. They're already happening and they exist out in the world today. So how do we compare those two things? Probability is one way of doing it. And probability is just what is the likelihood that your impact will happen? The thing you're talking about, whether it's a big thing, small thing, what's the probability that happens? So on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being impossible and 10 being 100% likely, what do you think is the probability of each of these? Let's say someone somewhere in the world wakes up tomorrow with a headache. What's the likelihood of that? Is that a 0 or a 10? Okay. How about a crew member gets spaced? Talking about the game Among Us, which I know many of you play. Depending on the type of people you play with, this might be pretty improbable. Maybe you're good players. You know how to reason and logic out what's going on. If you're anything like my friends, this is almost a certainty because they're not very good at this game. I'm not very good at this game. So a crew member getting spaced, pretty likely for me. How about the sun exploding? Sun's been around for a long time, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be around tomorrow. We do know that, stars eventually do transform and change, and it can change, obviously the whole ecology of the solar system. So what are the odds that the sun explodes tomorrow? What do you think? 0, 10, somewhere in between? How about Congress passes a law giving everyone $2,000? I'm writing this during the time of COVID where they're actually considering this, but this could happen anytime, right? If there's problems going on in the country or they just want to give people money so that they spend it to boost the economy, this is a thing that could happen. Do you think it's 0, not going to happen at all? Or is it 10? Is it like we're all going to get a check next week? If you haven't yet, you should pause, think through those, share your reasons, because ultimately this is about the reasoning of probability, right? Why do we think these things are likely or unlikely? That's what we want to get to. And then once we've thought about that, the whole goal of thinking about probability is the more likely impacts are the ones that we should spend more time thinking about. So yeah, sure. The sun might explode tomorrow, but probably not, right? It's been around a couple, 100 million years, something like that, 100 trillion years, whatever. This video series is showing that I don't know a lot about math or science, which is unfortunate. So the more you know, the better debater you can be. So always make sure you learn a lot of different things. But the sun exploding tomorrow seems pretty unlikely, right? So we don't really need to make a lot of plans in case that happens because the probability of it happening is very, very low. Whereas, something like Congress giving money to people, it's probably good to have an idea of like, oh, if I got $2,000 tomorrow, what would I do? Would I spend it on rent and groceries and stuff, or would I invest it? What would I do with it? It's probably good to have a plan for something like that. What about someone somewhere wakes up with a headache? That's pretty likely that someone might even be you. So do you have Advil at your house? Do you have something to deal with it? Are you ready to take a day off from school if it's that bad? Are you ready to just go through the school day if it's that bad? It's worth it to spend some time thinking about those types of impacts that have high probability, because those are the ones that we know are actually going to be a problem. Okay, last of the third is time frame. Time frame is how long does an impact take to happen? And what's more important, an impact that happens tomorrow or 1,000 years from now? So if we think back, actually the probability of the sun exploding is 100%, right? It's going to happen someday. But the probability that it happens tomorrow is very, very low. And that's why time frame is important, because we get a sense of how we prioritize, the different necessity of things, the different importance of things by not only if they're likely to happen, but when they're likely to happen. So let's just take this example. Let's say there's, an observatory that says that there's an asteroid that will hit Earth tomorrow. Okay, oof, that's not good. What about if we get some information that an asteroid will hit Earth 1,000 years from now? Which one of these two is more important? Which one do we care about? Which one is going to be more upsetting to us? Probably the one about an asteroid hitting Earth tomorrow, right? Not only because we're all probably going to be alive when that happens, so sucks for us, but also because the one that happens 1,000 years from now, we're probably not going to be alive, but also there's a lot of things that can happen between now and then to solve that problem. So 1,000 years from now, what will our technology look like to be able to solve that problem? Maybe it won't even be a problem at all. Maybe it'll just be, totally trivial and not a big deal. But the point of this, and I think this is fairly obvious, is that we should care more about the impacts that happen sooner rather than the impacts that happen later. So what do we make of all this in the end? We talked about magnitude, and we said we should care about the impacts that have the greatest magnitude. We talked about probability, and we said we should care about the impacts with the greatest probability. And we talked about time frame and how we should care about the impacts with the nearest time frame. So what about when we have impacts that don't share all three of those parts, right? What if we have one argument that says, okay, there's a really high probability thing that's going to happen, but it's going to happen a while from now, versus one that says, okay, there's a really low probability thing, but it's going to happen tomorrow. These are two different impacts, and let's say they're the same magnitude, right? They're two different impacts that have two different strengths. So it's not really clear which one we should focus on right now because they both have different parts to them. So at the end of the debate, your job is to show the impact, explain the impact and how it makes your story more important. So if your story is really, really strong on like the time frame and the probability, then you want to probably explain to the judge why we should be solving problems that exist right now. If your impact is really strong on like magnitude, but kind of weak on probability, maybe you want to explain to the judge that a really high magnitude thing is something we should always prioritize and always try to stop, even if it's not very likely from happening. So it's going to be your job as a debater to be able to look at your own arguments and say, okay, my impacts, how are they on a scale of 1 to 10, 0 to 10, what's their probability? What's their time frame? What's their magnitude? And then be able to figure out the strengths of your argument and explain those strengths to the judge. Make them understand that, probability is the first thing they should care about. Magnitude is the first thing they should care about. Time frame is the first thing they should care about. And you also want to compare this to your opponent's arguments, right? Because if you and your opponent both have really high magnitude impacts, but yours has a good time frame and theirs has good probability, you can just kind of agree that magnitude is important and move on, not really spend that much time on it. But you want to spend more time talking about what your strength is and showing the weakness of their argument rather than just going over something you both agree on, right? So if you don't have these three terms written down, probability, time frame, magnitude, you should definitely write them down. And you should definitely spend some time looking at your 1AC and 1NC and figure out what is, just look at it from this impact perspective and say, what's the probability, what's the time frame, what's the magnitude, and then be ready in either the 2AR or the 2NR to be able to explain what your impact is, why it's important, and why the judge should care about it from these three perspectives. And if you can explain that to your judge, you're going to have a really, really high probability of winning because this is a really important skill and it's a very persuasive skill to a lot of judges who are out there. So I hope this made a lot of sense. If it didn't make sense, feel free to leave a comment below or talk to your coach or email me, and I will hopefully be able to clarify this for you. Enjoy and happy debating.